i24news Daily and Ruth Wasserman Lande, former deputy Israeli ambassador to Egypt and Arab affairs expert. Thank you both for being with us here. We were just discussing, looking at the United States reaction, looking at some of the reactions out of Europe at this point to the ongoing conflict. But here's another angle to bring in. We want to look at the region some more here as they're shifting relations, certainly in the last months around the region. But here's the Turkish President Erdogan.
I condemn the Austrian state that hoisted an Israeli flag to its prime ministry. Hoisting a terror state's flag to the building of a governmental body means living a life that reflects terrorism. The state of Austria is probably trying to make Muslims pay the price for the Jews it subjected to genocide.
And now to bring that into discussion, perhaps no surprise by Erdogan's words here now, but clearly a certain standard that he applies to the situation that much of the world does not, Benjamin, in terms of looking at who's the terrorist in this equation?
Yeah, it's very interesting because when we are speaking about the Hamas, I mean, when you read the charter of the Hamas, I don't like to make this kind of comparison, but it's the closest to the Germany of the darkest days in history. So they are preaching in their official channel, Al-Aqsa channel, to kill not only all the Jews, but also the Christians. They educate their children that they should kill Jews. What he's talking about? What he's talking about? I mean, that's what they are. And you are telling us that Israel is the terror state? I mean, that's Erdogan. And
he's provided unprecedented shelter to Hamas.
The point is, main point, people who listen to him, and he is not the worst case because what I'm disappointed of is not Erdogan. He is totally expected. I'm totally disappointed from those anchors in the US. They have no idea what they're talking about. They have no idea about the nature of the Hamas. They have no idea about the charter. They have no idea about them preaching to kill all the Christians and to conquer America. To conquer America, not only Rome. I mean, I'm showing it when I'm giving lectures in the US. Look, this is the Hamas. Here is one of the heads of the Hamas speaking about it. The same like the Islamic State, the same like Taliban, the same like Al-Qaeda. They just ignore it. And this is the real story.
But Ruth, clearly what stands out about Hamas is that they're not necessarily like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. They are representing the Palestinians more or less at this point, or at least trying to represent the Palestinians. What other voices are coming out around the Middle East as you're hearing them? Clearly we have Erdogan trying to stir up trouble, trying to stir up support, essentially. What about our new friends in the United Arab Emirates, for example, who are no friends of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood movement? What type of sentiments are we seeing now, day 9 into this operation? Is there still neutral voices, or where are they being dragged?
I must say I agree with every single word that was said here in the studio. Erdogan is certainly not the kind of personality who can lecture anybody on human rights and who is a terrorist and who is not. In fact, I would go further and say that Turkey, Qatar, Iran sort of embraces Hamas and the Hezbollah, and in fact really tries to instigate a kind of uprising surrounding some kind of words that are very, let's say, incentivizing the masses to go out, such as Al-Aqsa and so on. If one just takes a quick glance at Al-Aqsa in the past almost a week, very many thousands, hundreds of thousands are praying there peacefully. No Jews are allowed to go up onto the mountain. Rather, Arabs and Muslims are welcome, and the peace and quiet is kept despite a truly complex and difficult situation. So what are the incentives of the likes of Erdogan, Qatar, Iran, and so on? They basically say it quite plainly, not only in the Hamas charter, but in every opportunity. In fact, the Hamas plainly states, we do not accept the very existence of Israel. Full stop. whoever wants to understand, understands, and whoever doesn't, doesn't. Our challenge here in the region, in Israel, and with our newly found friends in the UAE, Bahrain, and other like-minded countries that want stability, not necessarily out of love for Israel, but out of a wish for stability for their own people, like Egypt, like Jordan, etc., all of us should make absolutely sure that Erdogan, Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah do not succeed in their quest to create an uprising also amidst the Arabs within Israel. That's the next challenge.
Is it too early to see if this anti-Israel narrative is gaining traction throughout the region is all? Is it succeeding to rile up the region? We've seen the Palestinian arena get loud in terms of in Israel, on the borders, but elsewhere in the region, are there protests in Cairo? Are there protests in some of the Arab capitals as well?
I think that very clearly in Cairo, Jordan, the UAE, Bahrain, you do have people who are emotional, without a doubt, but there are no huge protests. In fact, we see more protests in New York and in the US rather than and we see again the use, or let's say the maluse, okay, of democracies, Western-style democracies, by the extremists for their own good. We saw it, we see it, and those who are experts in the matter are well aware of the dangers. It doesn't mean that we will become a non-democratic country. We shouldn't be there, we shouldn't go there, but it makes life more complex because we need to weigh human rights, the wish to live in coexistence with Arab neighbors in the region and with our Arab citizens inside Israel, and yet not allow the incitement, the throwing of 2,000 rockets on civilians and women and children without any indication that they don't want to hurt civilians. On the contrary, and doing it while using the Palestinians themselves in Gaza, by the way, the poor Palestinians as human shields themselves. So I really have no more words to say about Erdogan.
Just to add to that, officials of the Hamas are saying publicly, we are using our women and children and elderly people as human shields. They say it. I mean, just check. Why don't they show it? Why don't they, not in the CNN, not in France 2, not in, why don't they show it? I mean, this is the nature
of Hamas at all.
This is the nature of the Hamas, but totally ignored.
But you know, in the media in the UK, I was actually a little bit surprised. In France and the UK, and as Erdogan himself has said, in Austria and the Czech Republic and so on, there's been more support than before. Sure. In fact, I would say that the credit that we have from the US, despite the criticism and the call for calming down from both sides and so on, is still a greater credit than I think was given to us in previous...
I wish I could join you in this kind of optimism. I have to admit that, well, my family is half French and American, and I'm not that...
less optimistic than I am.
I'm not optimistic because what I hear from our friends in France and other places is terrible. I mean, demonstrations and the media. It is just...
Yeah, there's a difference between the media and demonstrations and the formal official line. You're absolutely right. And the media is relatively very bad. And yet still in the UK, I don't recall a positive coverage of anything to do with Israel, really, in the last 10 years.
It's been remarkable from the governments of Europe. Yeah.
But actually in this time, they did have some positive coverage, which is quite astounding, I must say, from the UK.
No, I always find some neutral or even pro-Israeli articles or some informative articles, which is good enough. That's what. I don't want you to like us. I want you just to know the basic facts about what is Hamas and what is the conflict about. It's not about occupation, as you always say. It has nothing to do with it. It has to do with the Islamic Jihad. It has to do with the very fact that wherever in the planet you have this kind of Islamic Jihad, you have destruction and bloodshed. And you have to face it. It has nothing to do with Israel. I mean, it happens in so many places in the world, from Yemen to Somalia to Libya to Afghanistan to Pakistan to Iraq to Syria. I mean, nothing to do with Israel. Unfortunately, we have one branch, which is the Hamas.
For now, so far, our international friends, the United States in particular, have blocked any concerted international effort to condemn Israel. Does anything appear to be coming together? We are entering now the second week of this conflict now. Will there be renewed efforts at the UN or perhaps the European Union? What do we expect, Benjol?
I'll tell you my idea is that Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, will go to the UN and declare something like that. We don't want war. We offer the Palestinians whatever they want. No siege, no closure. Just, we have only one condition: to disarm. To disarm. No more weapons. You have you are going to have whatever. Now, you know what? You know what? It was already offered. Not by Israel, it was offered by the EU. And what was the reaction of the Hamas? Total rejection. We prefer death, the industry of death. We don't want prosperity.
I want to go right now to an update from our correspondent on the